Britain's best cavalry never lost a fight, not one. And on January 17th, 1781, they still lost, without ever losing a fight. That's not a trick of phrasing. Every soldier in the British Legion who rode onto a frozen South Carolina pasture that morning had a flawless record against American militia. They had never once been outmaneuvered, outgunned, or beaten in a stand-up engagement. And by the time the sun was fully up, more than half of them were dead, wounded, or standing with empty hands raised in surrender, cut down not in a fight they lost, but in a fight they simply stopped showing up for. Their own commander rode back to his last reserve of horsemen, ordered them to charge, and watched them refuse. Undefeated cavalry, ordered into battle, and they just wouldn't go. So here's the actual question this video answers. And it isn't, how did the Americans win? It's stranger than that. How do you make an army that has never lost destroy itself, using nothing but the thing that made it unbeatable in the first place? The answer starts with a 44-year-old backwoods farmer, a scarred back, and one single night spent walking from campfire to campfire, building a trap so specific that it didn't need to beat Britain's best cavalry at all. It just needed them to keep being exactly who they already were. If stories like this, where the winning move is psychological, not tactical, are your thing, this is exactly what this channel does every week. Go ahead and subscribe now, because you're going to want the next one too. But first, to understand exactly how undefeated an army has to be before you can turn its own record against it, we need to go back 7 months earlier, to a general who had already lost the entire Southern War twice. Act 1. The reputation that became a weakness. To understand how an undefeated army loses without being defeated, you first have to understand exactly how undefeated they really were. Because the answer is more absolute than you'd expect. And that's the whole problem. By January of 1781, the American cause in the South wasn't just losing, it was disappearing. Charleston had fallen the previous May, taking more than 5,000 Continental soldiers down with it. The worst surrender of the entire Revolution. Then came Camden that August, where a full American army under Horatio Gates simply came apart in the open field, routed by a British force half its size. By the start of 1781, South Carolina's organized resistance had, for practical purposes, ceased to exist. There was no functioning American army left in the theater that could stand and win a fight. Not one. And at the center of every single one of those collapses rode the same man. Banastre Tarleton was 26 years old, and he commanded the British Legion, a fast-moving mix of cavalry and mounted infantry built for exactly one job: run the enemy down before they can regroup, and finish it. But here's the detail worth sitting with, because it's the key to everything that comes later. Tarleton's reputation wasn't built on one great victory. It was built on a pattern, repeated so many times it had stopped feeling like luck and started feeling like law. Show American militia a wall of horses closing at a gallop, and they scatter. Every time, no exceptions yet, that pattern had a name among the men who lived through it. After Tarleton's cavalry cut down Continental soldiers at Waxhaws, men who were reportedly already trying to surrender, American newspapers started calling it Tarleton's Quarter. It meant no quarter at all, and it did exactly what terror is designed to do. It made the next militia line break even faster, sooner, before the horses had even fully closed the distance. Fear was doing half of Tarleton's job for him before a shot was ever fired. Which raises the question nobody on the British side thought to ask, because why would they? If your cavalry has never lost, when exactly was the last time they were actually tested? Here's the answer, and it's the hinge this entire story turns on. Never. Not once. Tarleton's Legion had a flawless record against opponents who ran, but they had never, not one single time, been forced to execute a disciplined countercharge against a line that held its ground and hit back. Their sabers weren't the weapon. Their horses weren't the weapon. The weapon was the fact that no one had ever made them prove they could win any other way. Take that away, and nobody, not Tarleton, not his men, not Cornwallis himself, actually knew what was underneath it. Somewhere in the Carolina backcountry, a 44-year-old farmer, with a ruined back and no formal military training, had already started asking that exact question. And in a matter of days, he was going to force Tarleton to answer it. On ground Morgan chose, at a time Morgan chose, in a way that would make the strongest cavalry in the American theater walk directly into proving they'd never actually earned their reputation at all. Act 2. The man nobody trained to be a general. So who was actually capable of seeing through a reputation that even the British themselves believed? Not a West Point graduate, not an aristocrat. The man who was about to outthink the most feared cavalry officer in America had, by every standard of 18th century military culture, no business commanding anyone at all. Daniel Morgan had no noble family, no formal military schooling, no connections that mattered in a war still run largely by gentlemen. He'd grown up poor in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley, working as a teamster hauling freight through the backcountry, the kind of man officers were trained to give orders to, not take them from. And here's a detail that matters more than it first seems to. During the French and Indian War, a British officer sentenced him to 500 lashes for striking a superior. Morgan survived it, carried the scars on his back for the rest of his life, and reportedly joked for decades afterward that the British still owed him one because the drummer counting the strokes had lost his place. Keep that story in mind. In a few weeks, the same institutional arrogance that put those lashes on his back was going to walk directly into his trap. He fought at Quebec and took a musket ball through the neck without stopping. He commanded riflemen at Saratoga, whose marksmanship helped break a British army. But none of that is actually the reason he was about to win at Cowpens. The reason is smaller, stranger, and almost nobody talks about it. By the time Nathaniel Greene sent him west, with roughly 600 men, Morgan had spent 5 years simply watching how American soldiers actually behaved under fire, not how the manuals insisted they should. And what he saw broke one of the Continental Army's most sacred assumptions. In 1780, this was not a popular thing to say out loud. Militia weren't cowards. They were untrained men holding muskets and asking them to stand in an open field, trading disciplined volleys with professional infantry, was asking amateurs to play a game they'd never once practiced. It wasn't a character flaw. It was a mismatch. And here's the question that separates Morgan from every officer who came before him. If you already know your men will run eventually, why waste your career pretending they won't? So when word reached him that Tarleton was riding hard with over 1,000 men to catch him, Morgan had an actual decision to make. Retreat toward Greene and live to fight another day, the safe move, the move any reasonable commander would take, or stand, on ground of his own choosing, and force the one confrontation everyone assumed he couldn't win. He chose to stand, and the ground he picked should have told his own officers everything was about to go wrong. An open cow pasture called the Cowpens, a river directly at his back. No forest to vanish into, no swamp to hide the retreat, no fallback position of any kind. His own men thought he'd lost his mind, because by every rule any of them had ever been taught, you never fight with your only escape route sealed shut behind you. Except Morgan hadn't made a mistake. He'd made a decision nobody else in his position would have had the nerve to make. And it's the single choice this entire battle hinges on. If his militia had somewhere to run, they would eventually run there. So he took the option away entirely. But, and this is the part that separates Morgan from almost every commander of his era, the detail worth actually paying attention to, he didn't then ask those same militia to do something they were incapable of. He didn't demand they hold a line to the death. He gave them one job, one small, specific, achievable job. And then he did something no general in that war had bothered to do. The night before the battle, he didn't send officers to relay orders down the chain of command. He walked from campfire to campfire himself. He crouched in the frozen mud, next to shivering militiamen who'd been farming 6 weeks earlier, told them stories about Saratoga, and told them exactly, precisely, in plain language, what he needed from them. 2 shots. That's the whole job. Fire twice at the advancing British line. Then walk, not run, walk to the rear. Give me 2 good fires, he told them, and you can fall back with your honor intact. By dawn, every single man on that field knew exactly what his role was, and exactly when to play it. What none of them knew yet, what Tarleton was about to find out the hard way, was that Morgan hadn't just given his militia a job. He'd written the first act of a script designed to make Britain's best cavalry believe they were watching something they'd seen a dozen times before. And the moment they believed that, the trap was already closing. That kind of detail, the fact that this entire battle was won the night before it started, at a campfire, not on the field, is exactly why this channel digs into the mechanics behind these moments, instead of just the outcomes. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the moment, because what happens next is the part military academies still can't stop teaching. Here's how Morgan actually laid out that trap on the ground. Act 3. A battlefield built like a piece of theater. Here's what almost nobody watching that morning could see, and it's the entire reason this trap was about to work. What Morgan built at Cowpens wasn't really a battle plan. It was a script. Every man on that field had a line to deliver and an exit cue. And the only person who didn't know he was reading from someone else's screenplay was about to walk on stage, convinced he was directing it himself. Line 1, roughly 150 frontier riflemen, pushed out front with a single job: pick off the officers, then disappear. Line 2, around 300 militia under Andrew Pickens, given the exact same instruction Morgan had rehearsed with them at the campfires. 2 volleys, then peel off to the left. Line 3, about 450 Continentals and hardened Virginia militia, the Anvil, waiting on a low rise, trained to stand and trade fire the way professional soldiers were supposed to. And then there was the piece that mattered most. The one thing on that entire pasture the British had absolutely no way of knowing existed. Behind a second rise, completely out of sight of any approaching column, sat roughly 80 Continental dragoons and 45 mounted militia under Lieutenant Colonel William Washington, silent, motionless, waiting for a moment that hadn't come yet, for a battle that, as far as Tarleton knew, hadn't even been designed with them in it. Now picture what Tarleton actually saw riding up to that field, because this is where the trap starts working before a shot is even fired. He'd pushed his men through the entire night to catch Morgan. Up at 2 in the morning, marching through frozen creeks and mud, on almost no sleep and even less food. And when his scouts reported back that Morgan was drawn up in the open, with a river sealing off his own retreat, Tarleton read it exactly the way Morgan needed him to. Not a trap, a gift. A trapped, outnumbered rebel force with nowhere left to run. Precisely the kind of situation that had made him famous 3 times already. So he didn't rest his men. He didn't send out real reconnaissance. He didn't ask why an experienced commander would ever choose ground with no escape route unless he wanted you to think exactly what you were thinking. He just attacked, at first light, fully convinced this was about to be Waxhaws again, Camden again. A quick collapse, followed by an easy, bloody pursuit. And for the first few minutes, everything he believed looked like it was coming true. The riflemen opened fire from long range and fell back, right on schedule. British officers started dropping from their saddles before the main lines had even fully closed the distance. The redcoats pushed forward and found exactly what they expected to find: a rough, unimpressive militia line in farm clothes, the kind of enemy that had broken under pressure every single time before. At 50 yards, Pickens gave the signal. 300 muskets fired as one. Before the smoke had even cleared, a second volley tore into the staggering British ranks. And then, exactly as Morgan had promised them the night before, Exactly as rehearsed at a dozen separate campfires, the militia turned and started walking to the rear. To 300 experienced professional soldiers who had chased down broken Americans in every engagement of the war so far, there was only one possible way to read that. And that misread is the exact moment Morgan had been building toward all along. Because what happens in the next 60 seconds is the difference between a battle Tarleton thinks he's already won and the one he's actually about to lose completely. Act 4. The moment the trap closed. This is it. The 60 seconds the entire night of campfire promises had been built toward. And it starts with Tarleton's cavalry doing exactly, precisely, what Morgan needed them to do. They saw Americans turning their backs and walking away, and every single thing they'd ever learned about this war told them what that meant. The line was breaking. The rebels were running. This was Camden all over again, playing out in real time right in front of them. Officers screamed the pursuit forward. Discipline that had held through an entire night's forced march simply evaporated. Men who had built careers on the belief that momentum and terror won battles surged uphill after what they were certain was a fleeing, demoralized enemy. They crested the rise, still believing that. And what they ran into instead was John Eager Howard's Continental Line, rested, loaded, standing shoulder to shoulder, waiting for them the entire time. Howard held his fire until the British were nearly on top of him. Then he let it go, point blank, into a formation that had no order left to break out of. Before the survivors could even process what had just happened, Howard's men were already coming at them with the bayonet. And that's the moment William Washington's cavalry came out from behind the hill, the piece of the plan the British didn't even know existed. 80 dragoons at a dead gallop slammed into the exposed flank at the exact instant the front line buckled. Then Pickens's militia, the same men the British had just watched supposedly break and run, reappeared on the opposite side of the field, reformed, and opened fire from the rear. Front, flank, rear, all at once. A full double envelopment closing in under an hour, sprung by farmers and riflemen on professional infantry, who, 90 seconds earlier, thought they were winning. But here's the moment that actually matters. The one detail in this entire battle that explains everything the hook promised you at the start. The reason this is a story about an army destroying itself rather than simply losing a fight. With his infantry collapsing in front of him, Tarleton did the one thing that might still have saved the day. He rode to his last reserve, his own cavalry, the undefeated British Legion Dragoons, and ordered them to do what they had always done. Countercharge. Ride down a broken enemy. Let terror finish what muskets couldn't. They didn't move. The same men who had ridden fearlessly into surrendering soldiers at Waxhaws sat their horses and refused to advance into a line that was actually fighting back and closing around them from three sides. Their entire identity as soldiers had been built on exactly one condition: an enemy that breaks first. The instant that condition disappeared, so did they. Tarleton was left leading a handful of loyal officers into a brief, desperate clash of sabers with Washington's dragoons before breaking off and riding clear of the field entirely, leaving the rest of his command behind him. Morgan never fired a shot at that cavalry reserve. He never needed to. He had simply built the one battle in the entire war where the single condition the British Legion's reputation depended on would never arrive. And the moment it didn't, the most feared unit in the American theater discovered, in front of their own commander, that there had never actually been anything underneath the reputation at all. Which raises the question this video still owes you an answer to. What happens to a general, and to an empire's entire southern strategy, the moment a story like that gets out? Before we get to what this actually cost the British, hit that like button if you're the kind of person who wants to know why history's biggest reversals happened, not just that they happened. It genuinely helps this channel keep making these. Now here's what the collapse of Britain's best cavalry actually did to the rest of the war. Act 5. What it actually cost. and what it actually meant. So here's the answer to the question. Act 4 left hanging. What happens when the most feared unit in the American theater gets caught proving it was never actually tested? And the numbers alone are why historians still go back and double-check the math. Because on paper, it barely looks survivable for the losing side. In roughly an hour, Morgan's force killed or wounded more than 300 British soldiers and captured close to 600 more, along with their artillery. Tarleton lost over 80% of his command. American losses, 12 killed, about 60 wounded. Read those two numbers side by side again, because that gap is the entire story. Not a battle that was close and tilted one way, but a reputation that didn't survive contact with the one situation it had never been built to handle. But here's what almost nobody talks about, and it's actually the bigger casualty of that morning. Cowpens didn't just cost Cornwallis a battle. It cost him something he couldn't rebuild with reinforcements. The psychological floor his entire southern campaign had been standing on. The unspoken assumption that American resistance always broke under pressure, and that as long as it did, his cavalry was untouchable. The moment that assumption cracked, Cornwallis stopped thinking clearly. He burned his own supply wagons, trying to move fast enough to catch Nathaniel Greene in response, a pursuit that exhausted his own army and funneled him, step by step, toward a small Virginia tobacco port called Yorktown, where the war would end that October. Which means the real question isn't, did Morgan win? It's this: how do you actually defeat an enemy whose greatest weapon isn't their weapons at all? Because here's what made this different from every other battle in the war. Tarleton's cavalry had excellent horses, real training, genuine combat experience. None of that was ever the problem. The problem was that their confidence had only ever been tested against retreat, never against resistance, and Morgan didn't try to outfight that. He built the one stage in the entire war, specifically engineered to expose the gap between what they'd actually proven and what everyone, including them, assumed was true. He let their own reflexes do the work of destroying them. Military academies still teach Cowpens today as a textbook double envelopment. But strip away the tactics, and you're left with something colder and more useful than a history lesson. An army that has only ever beaten opponents who run has never actually proven it can win. And the instant somebody builds the one situation where running stops being an option, that entire reputation can collapse in under an hour, without anyone needing to fire a shot at the thing that mattered most. Morgan proved that once, on a frozen pasture in South Carolina. He wasn't the last person in this story to use it. 7 months later, on a much bigger stage, someone was going to run the exact same play on an entire British army. Except this time, the trap wouldn't take an hour. It would take a summer, an empty camp full of burning campfires, and a general who never saw it coming until his own army was already surrounded at a place called Yorktown. If you want that story next, subscribe. And tell me in the comments, was it Tarleton's overconfidence that lost this battle, or Morgan's psychology that won it? I don't think they're the same answer,